Sean Connery is James Bond, Agent 007. Never say never again.
My name's Bond.
Oh, you're Mr. Bond. I believe I'm having you in half an hour.
Oh, splendid. Your room or mine?
Heavy, Mr. Bond?
You're marvelously well equipped.
Thank you, James.
So are you.
Good to see you, Mr. Bond. Things have been awfully dull round here. I hope we're going to have some gratuitous sex and violence.
I certainly hope so, too.
Bond, the game is over.
Sean Connery is Ian Fleming's James Bond in Never Say Never Again.
It's Skipper, Richard Skipper, and this is Richard Skipper Celebrates. Who or what are you celebrating today? There's so much to celebrate when and if we take the time to do so. But I'm celebrating a lot today. I am celebrating the return of one of my favorite men on the planet, one of the busiest men on the planet, and that's Herbie J Pilato. We are celebrating the release of his latest book, which of course is Connery, Sean Connery, and that's coming out on the 6th, and that also commemorates the 40th anniversary of Sean Connery's last film, Never Say Never Again, which you just saw the trailer for. So Herbie, who or what are you celebrating today? All that I just mentioned.
You, Richard, you. That's who I'm celebrating. And actually, it's not Sean's final film. It's Sean's final film as James Bond.
That's what I meant to say. Yes, you're absolutely right. It's very interesting. First of all, before we delve into your book and all of that, I want to talk about you for a moment. First of all, just recently, when I appeared in Provincetown, we reached out to you and asked if you would do a little blog on me, which you did. Which says a lot about who you are, Herbie. So I want to thank you. You're truly a stand-up person in a sit-down world. It's very easy, as busy as you are, to have said, I don't have the time, maybe next time, anything, but you always step up to the plate, not only for myself, but for everyone. And that's what I hear from everyone. So kudos to you.
Well, thank you very much, Richard. It's very nice of you to say. I just try to do my part, and I appreciate, you and those like you, and I appreciate everyone. So I try to, offer something in return for the kindness that I am granted by others.
Now, in addition to writing these books, I think this is your 14th book, or is it your 15th?
One of those.
It's up there. So, but in addition to doing that, you write an incredible blog. I look forward to your blogs, and I post them, I share them. You did a great blog earlier this week, which I have been sharing with everybody I know. So they're getting to know you on other levels as well. And that was your blog on customer service.
Yes. What? Yeah, customer service, yes.
Well, let's talk about Connery. Sean Connery. And this book, most of the books, all of the books, I think, if I'm not mistaken, except for your book about your growing up in your childhood and your Christmas memories, but most of your books are really about television and the world of television. We've talked about that in the past, but this book had a different trajectory and a different genesis in getting started. So why don't you bring us up to date with how this book came to be?
Sure. Yes, that's actually a very great question and to begin. 2020, the pandemic, and I at that point had interviewed everyone I had ever thought of interviewing, wrote about everyone. I ever thought about writing about, and yada yada yada. I really thought I was done and with books. But my agent contacted me and says, Herb, I think you should do something that is beyond TV and do something that is just not classic TV geared. So quite frankly, we looked at, who passed away that week, and it happened to be Sean Connery and Dinah Rigg. And then there was an idea for a book about, he came up with an idea for a book about George Lucas and Steven Spielberg, to do something about them and their famous films of the bigger films of the 80s. So that's what happened. I got like proposals for 3 of those different ideas, book proposals, sent them to him. He sent them out. And within, 3 weeks, really, it was kind of tremendously phenomenal. We sold the Dinah Rigg book, the George Lucas Spielberg book, and the Sean Connery book.
Can you say never again?
Yeah, really. You know what? Oh my gosh. Wow, yes. Never say never again. I love it.
Prophetic. It's prophetic.
Wow.
What a journey this book has taken you on. To be honest with you, and be honest with me, were you a big Sean Connery fan prior to writing this book?
Absolutely. I was a big James Bond fan. I was a big Sean Connery as James Bond fan. Absolutely. I did not expect to have ever written about him. I love those movies and I love Sean. So yes, I was a big Sean fan.
Well, what I love about not only this book, which is incredible, I mean, your footnotes, everything in the book is just incredible. But not only do I love this book, I love the other books that you've written, and we're going to give a little teaser at the end. You have a YouTube channel, you have a website. People can go and get not only this book, but other books as well. But the thing that I love about you, Herbie, is that you really celebrate these people that you write about. There are a lot of books out there, you and I both know this, that can be trashy, can take us down a road that I quite frankly am not interested in. There's an audience out there for that, and God bless you. But you truly celebrate these people. And as I say with my show, I celebrate you and everyone else's body of worth, and you do the same thing.
Yes, and I try, thank you for that, Richard. I try to do honest books. As a journalist, you still want to tell the truth, but there's a way to present that truth in a dignified manner. And I think we've talked about that in the past. And Sean was by no means perfect. Elizabeth Montgomery, Twitch Upon a Star, in my biography of her, she was not a perfect human being. Mary Tyler Moore, not perfect. Dinah Rigg, not perfect. Nobody is perfect. So I wanted to explore these individuals, and certainly Sean, as honestly as I could, but to do so without being a goofball. To do so with a measure of class and sophistication, really, because ultimately that's who he was. He was a classy guy. He definitely had some issues with regard to women and yada, yada, yada. But the big picture of what I wanted to present was, here's this guy. He's got his flaws. Let's explore this, but let's do so with intelligence and some measure of, again, dignity. That's the key word.
Well, you truly are like a sleuth when it comes to uncovering their lives. And again, presenting them with dignity and respect. How do you, as an author, choose, in some instances, if this is really not for the public's consumption? Some people don't make that distinction. I think you do.
Yeah, I do. Yeah. It's, again, the way, if I look into something or if I see a controversial aspect, I always consider the source, not who's just saying it or being quoted, but who's reporting it too. And what is the goal there? I mean, there's been things said about Elizabeth Montgomery in particular and Sean that I've seen on other platforms that have just not pleased me. And I didn't even bother to reference those. I just like ignore it. You know, the old saying, if you can't say anything nice, don't say anything at all. So it's that kind of thing. I consider the source. So yeah, I go by the sources, you know.
And if you stick around long enough, as you and I have been, there are people out there who will form their opinions about us and put things out there that are based on speculation, based on secondhand information.
Right.
What is your method of really getting to the root of something when you are really questioning, did this really happen? I mean, is it going through various sources before you put it on the printed page? What's the process?
Well, I try to talk to as many people who are alive, obviously, who had anything to do with that particular topic or subject or whatnot, or quote or reference. And if I see the reference or the quote in several different places, that helps. You know, it's like, you know, it's with a rumor, you know, that thing about where if you start a rumor on one part of the room and you're within 15 people in the room, and by the time it gets to the 15th person, it's different. So I try to make sure that whatever was said by several different sources was the same thing. And if I can, I will contact these individuals or that source myself and say, what's going on? Let me hear it from you. The horse's mouth.
Now, as I said before, 14, 15 books, one of those. Your reputation precedes you. Has it gotten easier as time has gone on to get books published through you, or is it still the same struggle?
It's easier to write them because there's so many sources out there, and you know, and a book is never done today because there's a new reference that you can see somewhere on some library site or whatever. But selling it or getting others to, no, because publishing today is probably more difficult and crazier than it's ever been. It's not the way it used to be. Back in the day, there were several different A-list publishers, several different B-list, yada, yada, yada. Okay, now all the corporations have eaten each other up. Everybody has their own opinion. You know, you present your idea to an editorial board, or for an editor who likes your idea, brings that to their board. If somebody's having a bad hair day or a bad cup of coffee, if they don't like it, they don't like it, no matter how wonderful your proposal may be, or no matter how wonderful your idea may be. It's become more objective. It's become a more objective industry than it ever was. And it's always been that, you know? So it's difficult. It's still difficult.
Now, I want to get back to the trajectory of this book. Once it was decided that you were going to write the book, did you still present a book proposal, or were you able to sell the book on the idea alone?
Oh, no, I still, no matter what, I'm not at that level. And maybe some people are, I don't know. Maybe Stephen King doesn't need to write a book. I'm sure he doesn't. But yes, I wrote a 20 to 25 page book proposal, which is essentially an outline of what you see happening. It doesn't always end up that way in the process of writing the book, but the general idea still has to remain the same. So yes, I did a book proposal.
So the excitement was always there for you to write this book.
Yeah, I guess it was. I mean, before I went, I don't know, should I or shouldn't I or should I? But yeah, once I got into it, and then once I actually started writing the book and just seeing what a great actor Sean was, beyond, as I say, before, during, and what do I call it? Before, during, and after James Bond, I just, you know, fell in love with the guy. He's just he was an amazing human being.
I'm always curious if the first words that we read are the first words that you wrote. So what was your starting off point with this book?
Well, the first words that I wrote, or that ended up being in the book, were my story. You know, years ago, I worked as a bellman at the Marriott years and years ago back in Rochester. And we would have to not just bring guests into the hotel from their vehicles, but sometimes we would have to take the van or the station wagon in those days to the airport to pick them up, call in from the airport to the hotel, and let my colleagues, desk clerk, whatever, know who we had. So there was this great day where I went up to, and I had to pick up a Mr. Bond. And so, I'm like, okay. So I went to the airport phone, the Marriott airport phone to call my colleague at the hotel. And I picked up the phone and I said, Mark, his name was Mark, the front desk clerk. I said, Mark, I have Mr. Bond here. What do you want me to do? And Mark said, kill him.
Oh, that's funny.
So I'm like, okay, I got to open the book with that. I didn't ever really plan on that, but it came to me as I was finishing up, because sometimes the introduction is really the last thing you write, because it's a culmination of all your thoughts in general of what this book is about. So
now, I mean, speaking of introductions, Barbara Carrera,
Yeah.
writes the introduction to this book. How did that come about?
Well, I knew I wanted to get, very, very, first of all, to make it legitimate, I wanted to get people who were connected with Sean. So there was Richard Demarco, the fantastic, great Richard Demarco, who was Sean's lifelong friend from back in Scotland. I'm talking since the day they were born. He wrote the introduction. I also know that it was important to get at least one of the Bond women. And Barbara Carrera, because of the 40th anniversary of Never Say Never Again, which the book was really always, it's not just about that, obviously, that film. I did want a tie-in, an important tie-in as far as a date to release it. So I thought, let me ask Barbara, and she said yes. Although it was funny because when I reached out to her agent, he was like, yes, well, she'll meet you at Avalon, and I'm like, Avalon, what's he talking about? And then I'm thinking Catalina Island, and I'm like, oh my gosh, this is so exotic. I'm going to meet the Bond woman at the Catalina Island at the Avalon. All these things. I was like, how do I dress? It was the Avalon Hotel in West Hollywood. It just...
That's show business, folks, right there. So, it's very interesting. Again, your book, and it's even in the title of your book, the subtitle, that you are covering his life before and after Bond.
Yeah.
He did 7 Bond films, and I was with a dear friend of mine the other night, Alison Arngrim, who I know that you know, and Alison Arngrim has made an incredible career celebrating the legacy of Nellie Olson, Little House on the Prairie, and everything that she's done. There are other artists, I'm not going to mention any names right now, who have also done iconic roles that are forever identified with them. And they have struggled with moving on. Richard Thomas, God bless him, is touring the country right now with To Kill a Mockingbird, getting brilliant reviews. But he said in a recent interview that every night when he takes his bow, someone from the audience is going to scream, "Good night, John Boy." And he said he loves the fact that he has made that impression on people's lives.
Yeah.
And you talk about this a little bit in the book about Sean Connery and how obviously 7 films, and he, in the eyes of many people, many who have even commented on this in the show, feel that he is the definitive James Bond.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a strange thing, because when Sean first was cast or even considered, he told them, he's like, guys, I'm bald. I don't see how you could want me for this. It wasn't, he put the toupee on, he was fine. It was his presence. So this charisma that he had, this special magic that he had, this role that he was born to play. When he first got it, of course, he was excited, as would anybody be. He had wanted always, and he had envisioned himself on the big screen as a kid. He used to love reading comic books, and he envisioned that kind of role for himself at some point. You know, high end, or not high end, a high concept role.
Mhm.
And then he really studied the classics. He was self-taught as far as an actor, truly. But after, you know, like, what was it? You know, From Russia with Love. I mean, it was just the Bond phenomenon was overwhelming for him. And he came to really not just not like playing it, but he really kind of hated James Bond, the character. But by the end of his life, and I have found this again with Elizabeth Montgomery and Mary Tyler Moore, Sean came to peace with it because he realized, number one, that it wasn't going away, you know, so you may as well just deal with it. But I do think as you get older in life, you just you're more welcoming to everything, and you just let it go. You know, I just made a post about that the other day on Facebook. I have one word for you: let it go. You know, so I think
my dear friend Kassira McKee, she has a book called "Let That Go." So that's yeah. But you bring up 2 points, two aspects that I really wanted to focus in on here about his life before Hollywood. He didn't come from money, but he was self-taught. And from a very early age, he knew that he wanted to be a movie star or be in the movies. And he really read and studied and knew the classics. And it was for him really all about the acting, instead of the accoutrements that would bring him. So talk a little bit about his childhood and the trajectory to get to Hollywood.
Yeah. Well, he loved his mother. There were some issues with his dad, and then he had his younger brother. But they grew up poor with nothing. He used to drive like a milk truck, you know, and he was not really a great student or anything like that. So this is like in the rubber factory streets of Edinburgh, you know, and it was pretty much the ghetto. And they lived in a very, very small apartment, home, whatever, where he slept in, at one point, one of the drawers of his chest of drawers. You know, so it was really, really tough. And his father, when he started making his own money, his father kind of resented him. And then there was the whole fighting thing. I mean, here it was, this tall, you know, really, really handsome guy who guys probably just were jealous in general of, but he was a street fighter. Right. He was always getting into fights and whatnot. So that kind of like that toughness toughened him up, possibly, I think, for the role of James Bond. You know, one of his favorite of his films, or the favorite of his James Bond movies, is From Russia with Love. And in that film, there is this really very violent fight scene between him and Robert Shaw. And that's one of the reasons why he loved the film so much, is because Robert Shaw was in it, and they were roomies at one point early in their careers. But it was a very, very violent scene, but it was indicative, really representative of his violent youth. So I don't know if that's kind of why he liked it, but it was very realistic. It was very realistic.
But you also mentioned, I mean, he obviously early on had movie star looks. I don't even know if they referred to them as movie star looks in those days, but he had them. And he started out modeling and entered Mr. Universe pageant. I mean, he had all these things going for him. He definitely had the look.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and Richard Demarco, who wrote the foreword, was the person that Sean had modeled for in his art class. Richard Demarco had this art class, and Sean was modeling in one of those little, you know, bikini things. And Richard's like, you know what? I think that you should act. I think you should get out there and act, and you can make a lot more money moving on a stage, okay, than just standing there and looking wonderful. So Richard DeMarco really had a played a very important role in Sean's life. And what I love about their friendship is even after Sean became this super mega star, he was still loyal and noble to Richard, because Richard has this amazing, Richard DeMarco Gallery right in the middle there of Ettenberg. And Sean did whatever he could to do what he could to support that gallery and to support Richard's nonprofit organization.
You also talk in the books, I mean, it didn't all come easy for him, even though he had the looks. He was a struggling actor when he first, was trying to really make that big break happen for him.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. And that just goes to prove that, look, there's several different ways over time that people have become stars. And that is definitely dwindling now as far as options, for several reasons beyond the Me Too movie. You cannot do today what some people have done in the past to get ahead. And this is not just in Hollywood, but across the board.
Exactly.
But Sean really did. He made it on his own without any easy way. Come on, the guy was still beautiful, no matter what. No matter what rejections he experienced. You saw that this person, if he just applied himself, even in the littlest way, somebody somewhere was going to say, hey, wait a minute, this guy needs to be a star, which of course is exactly what happened when he walked into the offices of, the James Bond audition, and the guys just went, okay, this is James Bond.
This was him in high school. I mean, even then, he had this charisma.
Yeah. And his hair. Then he had his hair.
And the hair, which he eventually lost. Which he had talked about in the book.
Very honestly.
So I want to talk, before we get to the Bond franchise and how that really changed the trajectory of his life, what was the one thing as you were writing this book that you discovered about him that really surprised you above all others? And I'm not talking about the work that he created in Hollywood, but about his personal life.
Well, he was just so dang funny. He was a really, really funny person. And you see that across the board. Usually if someone's intelligent, their humor is a representative of that. You have to know what's funny so you can see what's serious in life. And he had a great sense of humor. And he made fun of himself too in the whole James Bond thing, ultimately down the road. So yeah, his sense of humor.
Let's talk a little bit about the what ifs when it comes to Bond. Because through your book, we learn a little bit about the process of them going after other actors as well. And it started here with Barry Nelson.
That's right.
He was the first Bond. Trivia question, everyone, if that comes up on Jeopardy. So he did that for television.
That's right. That was on TV. So Sean was not really the first screen Bond, because it was that gentleman there was the first screen on TV Bond.
Now, the role before we got to him was offered to
Cary Grant, who would have been good, but I don't know if he would have been tough enough, I mean, Cary's more elegant than Sean. And the character of James Bond actually was blonde, which ultimately Daniel Craig finally fit that bill decades later. I mean, Ian Fleming was not at all pleased when Sean walked into the room. The producers, the Broccoli gang, they loved him. But Ian Fleming is like, wait a minute, this guy's got black hair. He's got tattoos on his arm, which he got done when he was in the military as tribute to his parents. And it's like James Bond doesn't have tattoos and he doesn't have black hair. So there you go.
Cary Grant was 58 at the time, and he felt that he was too old to be playing this part.
Yeah, he was smart. He was smart. You know, Sean, when he came back to the role in Diamonds, came back twice because he left. He didn't do on His Majesty's Secret Service, which I think was a mistake. And then he came back to do Diamonds Are Forever. And then years later, he came back and he did Never Say Never Again. With Never Say Never Again, the character was older and he played into that. He didn't pretend that he had not aged. He did not pretend that it was 20 years since Dr. No when he first. So I loved that they made that real. One of the complaints that he had about the character is that there wasn't enough character development, that he was just born 33 years old or born 30 years old. He didn't have a mother. He didn't have a father. And when I say that I was disappointed in, and I think he should have done on Her Majesty's Secret Service, is because the character met and married for the first time. This Diana Riggs character, strangely enough, ironically enough, and James Bond got married for the first time, and that added the character that he needed. And I do not know why Sean said no to that. That would have been lovely, because people have put down on Her Majesty's Secret Service and George Lazenby, who played the part, but it's really a great film. It would have been an even greater film with Sean. So I don't know if I answered the question anyway.
Yeah, absolutely, you answered the question. I want to ask you, I mean, these films are such a product of their time. As a kid, I mean, we looked forward to the next James Bond movie coming out because it was filled with excitement. It was filled with beautiful women. Interestingly enough, when you referred earlier, you said the Bond women. And for a long time, they were the Bond girls.
Correct.
These films are very much a product of their time. In your research and in the work that you're doing, how are audiences perceiving these films now? I mean, obviously, Sean Connery is timeless.
Yeah.
But the Bond franchise, I don't think is as timeless in the world that we're living in right now. No. So in your research, what have you discovered?
Well, they changed the Bond character, I think, pretty much with Pierce Brosnan. I think that was the first time that the character of James Bond wasn't as, questionable in his interactions with women as previous Bonds. But the James Bond era of Sean, or Sean's James Bond era, that's the way guys were. Macho guys, machismo was encouraged to be like that. There are still many women today who unfortunately like to be mistreated, which is just ridiculous, by men. There's that bad boy image. So, and let me be clear, okay, what Sean did off screen, sometimes towards women was not correct. And I certainly do not endorse that. But I don't endorse the mistreatment of men mistreating women, or of women mistreating men, or of men mistreating men, and women mistreating women. I don't endorse any mistreatment of anyone. But Sean got caught up, I think, in that whole, he was a victim in many ways of that machismo, of his youth, because that's how he was brought up in his era. And then the whole James Bond thing fit him in that way. And no, James Bond did not have a lot of respect for women, a lot. But at the same time, women loved him. All women loved him because, quite frankly, we didn't know any better to love someone differently than that.
Well, let's talk about the women who did actually love him, his wives. You really go into detail about their relationships and the dynamics of their relationships as well.
Yeah. No, his first wife adored him, Diane Salento, but she was an actress. Okay, so you've got two actors. He was the superstar through James Bond. He was getting upset and feeling overwhelmed by that. And she was. And there was this kind of competition between them. So it's always tough when two actors get together and, they marry or whatnot. His second wife, okay, Micheline, she was like an artist. They met on the golf course, which he loved. Two different worlds, opposites. So that relationship worked more productively and certainly lasted longer. She loved him to the day he died, and she was there for him in his final days. So, and then there were, the actresses who completely adored him. Luciana Paluzzi, who was one of the Bond women from Thunderball, and who I, by the way, will be seated next to at the Hollywood show in Burbank on Friday, when I will be signing copies of the book at that time.
Say hello, Floribus. Thank you. That's wonderful.
And then there's Barbara Carrera. She adored working with Sean, and she made that very clear in the foreword to the book and in the commentary that is throughout the book. Lana Wood adored Sean. She worked with him and performed with him in Diamonds Are Forever. So yes, there are this bunch of women who loved James and Sean, and loved Sean, but there were also the issues that he had.
Well, I want to talk, speaking of men and women and mistreatment, I had the good fortune several years ago to interview Tippi Hedren, who you also interviewed.
She loved him, yes.
And talk a little bit about Marnie, which is psychologically a strange movie, and Hitchcock, who we all love as a director, but he had his own way of working with both men and women, and it was very different.
Yeah. Alfred Hitchcock definitely had his issues with women. Tippi had issues with Alfred. I mean, he was infatuated with her. So there's that. But as far as that movie, it was a wonderful thing for Sean to have done, because he did that after Dr. No, and it was something that you were really kind of not, it was not an easy transition for someone who was so identified with a particular role to go into something different. But Sean made that happen. And I say this in the book, and really the whole thrust of the book is no matter what roles he did, whether it was in Marnie or even Darby O'Gill before James Bond, or The Untouchables, and certainly The Rock later on, where he essentially played an older James Bond, there was an essence of Bond in each of his performances, because really there was an essence of James Bond in him. He was James Bond, no matter how much he tried to get away from it, and he did, and he did accomplish it. I mean, with a movie like Name of the Rose, for gosh sakes, right?
Oh, yes.
I mean, you don't get any different than James Bond than Name of the Rose and Monks and the whole thing. But still, there was that James Bond essence in him. And there was a James Bond look in Marnie, as well as the movie he did with Gina Lollobrigida, which the title of the film escapes me. And he was an evil character in that, he was really maniacal. But there was even a wardrobe, I believe, he shared with James Bond from Dr. No or from Russia with Love, one of those, where he used in that film. So it was inescapable. It was inescapable. James Bond would be with him from the minute that he played him to the day he died.
Well, as you were writing the book, did you write in a chronological order his life and career? And if so, did you go back and watch all of these films, in chronological order, and talk about the growth of Sean Connery as an actor, something that he always aspired to?
I did decide to write in a narrative chronological manner. I know that, a lot of movies today and a lot of books, they do this flashback thing, just tell the story, please.
Yes.
Keep to the linear story, please. So yes, I did watch as many, not all, but I'm thinking as many of his films as I could. And it was just amazing how he really gave 100% to whatever he was doing. He was dedicated, and it was important that the writing was there. It wasn't necessarily who was producing it or who was in it with him. He really didn't care about those things, really. All that mattered to him was the writing, because he knew about structure. He knew about the character development because of his own self education in reading the classics of Ibsen and Shakespeare and whatnot. So he definitely, if you look at Darby O'Gill, that was a cute little performance, and he actually sang on camera. But the Untouchables is certainly 9 billion% farther than Darby O'Gill. And there was a sweetness and a more delicate addition to his performances that allowed him to stretch and get away from James Bond, and yet James Bond again was still there underneath the surface.
Now, out of all of this, do you have a favorite film that stands out above all others for you?
Of his. I just love the James Bond movies.
Do you have a favorite of the James Bond movies that he did?
Well, yeah, Dr. No. I mean, because it's first. I'm a first person, like the first Darren and Bewitched.
The first Mr. Tate.
There was only one Mr. Tate.
I know Mr. Tate. I meant Mr. Stevens. That's what I meant to say.
Yeah.
Because there were two.
Yeah. Let me think about this, because I didn't like the artsy fartsy take of the later movies that he did. But I'm going to say I love The Rock, and I loved, strangely enough, that Gina Lollobrigida movie that I can't think of the name of. But I loved that one. It was a way for him to get away from playing a hero, because he played a villain. And that was really a great thing for him to do. So that movie that I don't know the title of.
And again, I'm always interested in the process. Do you make a list of the people that you ideally hope to get an interview with, or does that unfold as the story starts to unfold?
It unfolds, because Sean is an older actor. A lot of the people, certainly from his earlier films, are not here. They're not alive. Even the producers or whatnot. But people like Bill Daly, who starred with Sean in that Irish film, again, that I can't think the title of, forgive me, the O'Malleys or something. Darn it. So he started with him in that film. And then he also worked as a producer or studio executive at Warner Brothers for Sean's later films. So that was a nice thing to do, to connect with somebody who performed with him and then ultimately served as one of his superiors in a supervisory way. It just happens, okay, if I say to myself, all right, I'm going to study Darby O'Gill. Let's go to IMDb, see who's alive on Darby O'Gill, or see who's still connected to the film, and let's reach out to those people. If not, then, I have to rely on different sources, more entertainment historians, and I tried to get as many other entertainment historians involved.
Were there any interviews that you were hoping to get that you didn't get, or were you pretty much successful in getting the interviews that you wanted for the book?
I was disappointed in one. I wanted the actress. I'm so busy not doing well with the names at all today.
You've got a lot on your mind this week.
I'm going to be 63, I guess. I think it's coming. All right.
Oh, well, I'm right.
Ursula Andress. I wanted Ursula Andress,
okay,
who was the first real Bond woman from Dr. No. And I was going back and forth with her son, an email, and she was going to do it, then she wasn't going to do it. And then, she's 90-something years old. So I cut her some slack on that. But that was probably the only disappointment in not getting Ursula.
And you also go into great detail on the last years of his life. And if you can bring us, I want everyone to buy the book, so I'm very careful with what I ask. But if you can take us to his last years and remaining days.
Yeah, yeah. Well, his first wife, wrote a memoir about her life with him, and she and he, and everybody has their story. So she had her version of it, he had his version of it, but she wasn't all that positive about it. So right around that time, he did a movie called The League of Extraordinary Gentlemen, which was a kind of a superhero movie, but it was a bomb and it was not really a good movie. So those two things combined, he decided essentially to retire. Okay. So does anybody really retire in the creative world? I've thought about it myself, but there are people who retire from other jobs and end up writing and acting. So there you go. So Sean kind of just, I think was, in my opinion now, pushed into retirement because of those two things. His wife, he was a little embarrassed about his second wife's memoir and what she said, and he tried to defend himself, but it kind of didn't work. And then that horrible movie he did, so he was kind of like done. And he came back for some like voiceover work to the character of James Bond for a video game. So he actually he returned to the role one more time in voiceover for this game. But then he started having issues with memory. And when you have, my mom had Alzheimer's, she had dementia. It's not just the brain that it affects. It affects every function of your body.
Right.
And he was not the man, that he was before. And he lost a lot of weight, and his wife and his son Jason were by his second wife, Micheline, and Jason was the son of the first wife, by the way. Micheline and Jason were by his side till the day he died. And his friend Michael Caine, was there for him. And they had known each other for years. And now, from what I understand, Michael is not doing well as well. But these people are in their 90s, for gosh sakes.
God bless them. And but I mean, thank God for these films, because he will always be that young James Bond that we saw, and we saw the trajectory, as I mentioned earlier, just growing more and more into his work as an actor on film. But he also had a tremendous sense of humor about his position in Hollywood.
He did. And again, that's what I loved about it. He joked about it. And again, he came to peace with it. What is a movie star or any actor truly without self-deprecation, especially someone who reaches that point in life? I mean, I'm thinking of Mary Tyler Moore and the line that she would say when people would come up to her and say, "Oh, I loved Mary Richards. I wish I could be like her." And Mary was like, "Well, yeah, so do I." So, because, she had her issues too, as we talked about, I believe, at some point in a previous interview.
I think it's in your first book also that there was a line about her, if I remember correctly. And by the way, the audiobook it just came out.
Yeah.
But if I'm not mistaken, and you're going to correct me, I hope, but that when people would say, that Laura Petrie, that it was such a wonderful character, and she said she was a housewife, she was stuck at home, she was doing. Do you remember what I'm referring to?
Yeah. I don't think she had really complaints about Laura. I think Hope Lang did when she played in the new Dick Van Dyke Show, and I know Suzanne Plachette had issues with playing just a wife on the Bob Newhart Show, and that character kind of grew. But Mary, I think she was of her time in that role as Laura Petrie. I think She was a home engineer who really ran that house. I think she embraced it. I think that she was a strong presence behind Rob Petrie. She's the one who literally wore the pants in the family. That was a big deal. That she didn't want to. Okay, so yes, she didn't want to wear the dress or the pearls. Correct. So this is, I think, where you're going. She didn't want to wear the pearls like Leave It to Beaver and Barbara Billingsley on that show, and the Donna Reed look. She wanted, to do something different. So yes, I do support what you said. You are correct in that way. She wanted to have Laura be more independent, and the character became that.
As time went on, it did. Is your process very similar with each book, or does it vary depending on the subject that you're writing about? I know with this book, you and I, we've talked about this. We're both the same age. I'm right behind.
Oh, you're 43?
Yes. But you, in your earlier books, you and I are both the products of 1960s and 70s television. We grew up with this. And Sean Connery, until perhaps, when you were looking to see who had passed away recently and going into COVID, the process is a little different. What are the similarities with writing this book compared to the other books that you've written? And what have you learned as you've moved on?
Well, I think I've become truly, honestly, a better writer. Some people are born terrific writers. I wasn't that. I was a good writer, but I was more of a fan. I didn't always look at things objectively, certainly when it came to Elizabeth, because I loved her so much, and I knew her and I knew what a great person she was. So when I first wrote the Bewitched book, not her biography, but the Bewitched book, it was really a fan's look at that show. Her biography is still, from a fan's point of view, but also honest. Mary Tyler Moore, I didn't know that. I didn't know her at all. And I wanted to make sure it was very objective. And certainly Sean, I did not know. So I wanted, and because I wanted to also do something beyond TV, and I wanted to go into the movie realm, I really wanted to up the ante a little bit. I really wanted to take things to the next level. And I was very, very careful not to sound like a fan and to just look at the whole spectrum of his life very, very objectively, and very from a journalistic point of view. And yet I didn't want to lose, who I was as a writer. And I still wanted my voice to be there because there's certain things, that like that whole story about, picking up Mr. Bond at the airport. I wanted to include that because I still wanted to be fun and entertaining and not dry, And that's also one of the reasons why I put the pictures of the book in separate sections of just like I do with all the previous books, because I don't like it when pictures are on the same page every other page. It's like you're reading the narrative of the book, and then you see a picture, and then you got to read the caption, and then you want to go back to the narrative of the book, and you're like, wait, where was I? What? No, I didn't want the photos to interrupt the narrative. I wanted it to them to be placed at the certain sections where one section would end, and then you could take a breather. The reader could take a breather and look at the photos. So overall, to answer your question, yes, I became, I think, a better writer, a more objective writer, and a more professional writer as time goes on, or as time went on. And this book that I am here and that you've shown so beautifully in the display is, I think, the best book I've ever done.
Oh, congratulations.
Was
the Bewitched companion book the first book that you wrote?
Yes.
And I love that book. So I've always been a fan of yours. So that's, and speaking of fans, a question I'm curious, as a writer, when you are writing about people who are so much a part of our consciousness, do you feel an obligation to the fans as well? Or do you completely remove yourself from that process when you're writing the book?
All of those things. I try to please everybody when it comes to the writing. Yes, I feel an obligation to the Sean Connery fans and Elizabeth Montgomery fans. But when I approached Sean Connery, when I thought about this book, because there's other biographies out there, how can this book be different? How can I make this book different? And here is how it's different. It is a full, in-depth biography of his life and career, whereas other books have been that. But in addition to that, it has the Richard Demarco contributions, which the other books do not have. It also explores the James Bond movies, which other books have done separately, but it also explores in depth the other non-James Bond films that he's done, which other books have done, but none have pulled it all together with new information, with new quotes, with still relying on the original sources and pulling from everything that's out there already, but adding a different edge to it and adding different information and even more depth. I wanted this book to be reminiscent of the others and yet combining it all in one, with new information. That was the conscious decision I made, because people said a lot of the reasons that it was rejected by other publishers because they said, there's already too many biographies. No, this is different. So how do you convince one publisher whereas the other publisher say no? You go by it's a crap game, really. You find an editor who loves your idea as much as you did or do, and you run with it. So I found that ultimately with God Bless Bear Manor Media.
Well, you pretty much have answered my next question. I was going to ask what you feel that you've learned about yourself from writing this book, and I think you pretty much have told us this. And do you think that because of this book, I know that Diana is waiting in the wings, do you feel that your approach to writing has somewhat changed?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Especially when I started writing about the movie stars and as opposed to TV stars. Now, Diana, she's both of that. I mean, what's really interesting about Diana and Sean, they were both stereotyped, okay, by Diana by the Avengers, Sean by James Bond, both secret agents. But they both worked very hard to do different roles. Diana succeeded on a different level, more so than Sean in that capacity. Certainly with roles like on Game of Thrones and whatnot, and in the last film that she did, which was just tremendous. But in the real life, Sean took better care of himself physically than Diana did. Diana was a smoker, and had she not smoked, I think she would have lived longer. And she lost her looks, quite honestly, based on the smoking is a horrible, horrible thing. I mean, it dries you out just as bad as alcohol, even worse.
My father had both of those issues, and when he passed, he was many years, he had aged himself tremendously.
Yeah, it does. It ages you. So Sean was smarter in that capacity, but as much as he tried to get away from Bond, he couldn't. And as much as Diana tried to get away from the Avengers and playing Mrs. Peel, she did more so. But she didn't take care of her health as well as he did in real life. So there's an assimilation there, and of course they acted together in one film, which of course I can't think of the name of.
Absolutely. No, I can't believe this hour has flown. And,
wow.
Yes, and I just absolutely, the book is incredible. I want to bring this up on the screen and share this with everyone. Connery, Sean Connery, it is the definitive biography.
And it's also in audiobook form now, too.
Yes,
Yes.
Everything's happening on the 6th. But I got you before then. So I want to thank you in the midst of your busyness to be here. Don't go anywhere for a moment because I want to give my closing remarks. And then I'm going to leave the screen and I'm going to have you give your closing remarks. It could be about anything that we spoke about that you want to build upon, anything that we didn't talk about that you wish we had, or just any final message you want to leave everyone with today. I want to thank everyone for being here. If this was your first time at Richard Skipper Celebrates, I hope that it will not be your last. And also, speaking of Richard Skipper Celebrates, check out Herbie's YouTube channel. It's incredible. It's like going down the rabbit hole. You won't be able to leave. So thank you for all the work that you do. I want to thank everyone for being here. Please leave a comment and share if you can, because that will increase the ranking of the video, and this will bring this to more and more people. I'm also a big proponent of independent booksellers. So what I would like you to do is call your favorite bookstore or your favorite library and ask if they have this book on their shelves. And if they don't, encourage them to get it. Then what I would like you to do is to order 2 copies, one for yourself, and then I want you to go to your Facebook friends list, and I want you to reach out to the 7th name that pops up, and I want you to send a copy to them. And just say, I'm doing this because you matter in my life. And I think it's very important that we all take the time to reach out to those people that make a difference in our lives. Let them know now how much they matter until after they've gone and it's too late to do so. Although, thanks to the work that you're doing, Herbie, we've got the definitive book to celebrate Sean Connery, Beyond Today and Always. As a dear friend of mine always says, we're all in the same storm, but we're in different sized boats. And I always say, I don't care what size boat you're on, as long as you have a skipper by your side. And with that, Herbie, it's all yours. And then when you say goodbye, I got a little treat for you and everyone else. This is for you.
Geez, Richard, I think you said it all. I mean, God bless you for the light that you bring. And I try to shed a little light with my work, and with Sean Connery, as I said earlier in the program, he was not a perfect man. None of us are perfect human beings. We all have flaws. And he did a lot of good in the world. And we all try to do, hopefully, a little good in the world. So as long as we balance it all out with dignity again and respect for each other, and as long as we respect each other's opinions, it's okay to have an opinion about something, but it's the way that we present those opinions that I think is very, very important. Don't use anger with expressing yourself. Use kindness, understanding, say what you got to say, be firm about how you feel about something, but do so with respect for all people concerned. And if you want personal copies of my books, any of my books, whether it's Connery, Sean Connery, Switch Upon a Star, go to my website, herbiejpilato.com, contact me via Facebook or Instagram, and or even email me if you'd like, right from my website. And then I will send you a personally signed copy, a hardcover or paperback of Connery, Sean Connery, Twitch Upon a Star, whichever you would like. Thank you so much for allowing me this amazing platform to speak here. And God bless you all, and peace to you all.